Ladies and
All right.
gentlemen, I have the great pleasure of bringing a friend of mine to Poets of the East, a gentleman who is an exemplar of the finest humane values, an educated man, and a man with a great heart who graces any poetry stage he is on and a lot of other stages too. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Deena Paydayachee, my brother from South Africa, from Durban. Sir, you have a poem for us. Let's go ahead and start with your poem.
Thank you, Richard. It's I don't know how to express my gratitude to you for what you're doing. It's the most wonderful thing, one of the best things that anyone's ever done for me in my entire life, and my gratitude to you is immeasurable. I'll go ahead and read my poem. It's a poem of love for my father, and a tribute to the people of Hamshlali Sawmills, the firm that he and his brother founded. I wish I could hug you just one more time, dear Appa. Appa means father. I wish I could kiss you just one more time, dear father. I wish I could buy you just one more present, give you just one more card. I wish I could invite you to supper just one more time. I wish I could chat with you just one more time. Show a little more appreciation for all that you're done for all of us. Look at you just one more time. Love you just a little longer. Hug you just one more time. You loved us, your family, your people, and your country far more than we ever loved you. You built a school, you maintained it, created employment, fed and housed families, nurtured everybody and everything. Visions of your benign visage, your beatific smile, and your aura fill me with peace. Thoughts of what you were to us suffuse me with emotion. Your kindness, your warmth, your caring, your compassion, your great love, your wisdom, your energy, your sense of fair play, your deep insights, your sense of ethics, your great maturity, your ability to cope calmly with envy, injustice, racism, the insane vagaries of South African life are all an inspiration to us as we face life's greatest challenges these days. Thank you.
What a beautiful tribute. My goodness. That is the most lovely father's present that I've ever heard. Sir,
Thank
it
you.
just speaks to what kind of sensible and sensitive human being you are. I thank you for sharing that, sir.
Thanks.
You've told me in other times a little bit about your father. Why don't you go ahead and talk about him just for a minute?
My father had a standard four, which was a grade six. So I often wonder about that because when he wrote things, it was a bit of a scrawl. And I wonder, it was what we call jointing writing rather than individual letters. But he had a wisdom and intelligence and insight, empathy, like I said in my poem, that was way beyond just about anybody I knew at that time. And even in later years, when I encountered professors and very great people, his greatness, um, was in a sense magnified because I realized that despite his lack of education, he was able to cope with the inferno, the cauldron that was apartheid, in an incredible manner, not really getting angry with people, but he always said, let's fight with the work, let's not fight with people. And I've always held that close to my heart. Even nowadays, I avoid conflict with people. I find if they are, very sad in the way they behave, there's no point in trying to attack them and confront them.
Absolutely. There's such wisdom in that. And you know, just from what little I know, your father built a business and he built a school. So few people are so committed to education. that they not only make sure that their own children are educated, but they make sure that that educational process is available to a village, to a town. And that speaks volumes, I think, about what kind of man he was.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We had a get together of the people from the area which was expropriated by the Belito municipality, and we were expropriated as well. And they came over, those people. It makes me emotional even to talk about it now.
Sure.
But they were incredible. The way they came to me and thanked our family for what we did for the community. It was unbelievable.
My wife's family had, in a way, a similar tale. Uh, my wife's family had, after she left home, had moved down to the Caribbean, to an island off the coast of Honduras. And as you can imagine, the most of the people living there who are employed are exploited. They're taken great
Yes.
advantage of. They pay
Yes.
exorbitant prices, get the smallest amount of wages. And my wife's father and mother ended up not just hiring people and giving them respect that they've never been shown, but also paid them what was essentially American wages, even though they were living in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And consequently, the town's leaders on this island of Roatan, the town's leaders came to them angry and said, you are causing trouble. You are paying too much. You need to pay your people less. And to his credit, he continued to pay good wages to his
Right.
people.
Right.
And just like your father, he built a school for the
Mm,
local people
that's
and
wonderful.
made sure that the kids had uniforms, that the kids had books, that the kids had teachers. And long after they retired, they continued to support the school, the
Right.
kids, the
Right.
families. And it was life changing,
Mm,
really life changing for the people down there. I, I could never say enough about the kind of people they were.
yeah.
So I was very impressed by that. So
Yeah.
your
I'm
father,
sorry. I must just mention something.
please.
Did you ever get a chance to read my short story about him? It's called A Different Kind of Standard 4.
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, I must send you the a
Please do.
PDF of my book.
Please do.
When I was part of the writers' circle, they asked for a story about our heritage. So
Mhm.
I wrote that story. Thank God I did then. Because now when I look back on that story, I think about how this community had to negotiate with government, the government of that time, the apartheid government of Natal, in order to establish an official school. So they had to find out the requirements of government, and they donated their own land, and they were asked to maintain it. So they had to do that. And they had to build two classrooms and a principal's office. Now, the actual mechanism of that negotiation is something that fascinates me. Did my father write a letter to them? Did he make an appointment to see them? Did he go with his committee to Pietermaritzburg, the capital of Natal, to meet the education officials? Because they had to believe that he would do what he said he wanted to do you know and they didn't have the money to do it, so they had to go around to the local community, including the white people, asking them for donations so they could build a school. And the community, both Indian and white, had to believe in this committee, you know, to actually build that school. And one of the things my father said was that when they collected a sizable amount of money and they were embarking on building the school, one of the committee members said, "Look, we must celebrate. We've collected a lot of money, and perhaps we can go and have a little party, at the beach." And my father said, "No, we're not going to do that. And whatever happens, every cent and he was the treasurer of the group, he told me. So every cent we collect is going to the school. And if you want to have a party, use your own money, but we are not going to have that kind of reputation, you know.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
it was, it really touched me that he actually said that, and that's how he did it. It's one of the things he told me after I had written the short story. So I didn't include it in the short story, but, it meant a great deal. And, I'm sure you have the same problem. You look back and you think, I should have asked my father this, should have asked my mother that. And I don't really know how they managed to do this, that, or the other, for the family and for the home and that sort of thing. And I'm faced with precisely that problem.
Well, I'm one of those people that I did ask because
Hmm.
I have a very, very serious and strong historical interest.
Yes.
I've always been
Yes.
intrigued by history. In fact, I don't know if I've told you this story. I was reading avidly the history of the 1920s in America at one point. I was over visiting my grandmother, and I noticed that on her mantelpiece was a photo of her wedding, which happened in 1920. So
Yeah.
here she was, a young woman in the 1920s. The America was racing toward the Great Depression. It was a frivolous time in a lot of ways, but women's access to the vote was also coming to fruition in the early
Right.
1920s. So I asked
Right.
my grandmother, who was a wonderful woman, very involved in her community, always instrumental in organizing things, doing canning exercises, helping out at their school and her church. I said, Grandmother, it must have been so interesting to be among the first women to be able to vote. How amazing that must have been. She had been an
Yes.
orphan. Her parents had died when she was just a child. She was raised
Wow.
by relatives who didn't treat her very well. And here I thought, wow, this must have been so interesting to live in that time, to see what she saw. And she said to me, eyes downcast, she said, Ricky, I've never voted. So here, this was the 1960s. 40 years had gone by since the 20s. And this woman, a, a strong part of her community, in her city, in her town, on her block, in her church, this woman had never felt enough self respect, enough treatment that she felt that she shouldn't vote because she didn't know enough. And I thought, what a shame. And I told her, I said,
Yes.
your your moral center would count for so much.
Yeah.
Your native intelligence. You may not have finished high school, you may not have gone to college, but your heart is a wise heart. And I wish your community had benefited from that. But it just, people make a life in a time. What your father did for your community, that's fantastic. I can see his reflection in your life, what you have done with yourself. And
Thank
I
you.
I think your father is very proud of you still.
Yeah. I always say that our parents are alive in us. So when
Absolutely.
we miss them, we have to look inside ourselves because that's where they are.
Absolutely. So I have my questions,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we've already
Yeah.
gone around it once, but I'm prepared to bet that some of the people who will watch this show may not go back and find the other one in the archives. So let me ask you just a couple of the questions, and then I'll let you do some reading. Uh, the first question I'm going to ask you is, what's the earliest book you can remember when you were a child?
Okay, I just want to say
Yes.
that when you made this invitation to me, I went back to the first interview and I watched the whole thing. Now, previously, when you'd share the recording on YouTube, I I don't know what happened, but I only watched about 10 minutes of it. And I think because it was so fresh in my mind, I didn't watch the rest. So I went back and watched the rest, you know. I thought to myself, gee, you know, Richard has really, really done a great job. That the way you polished everything up and you put it across, it's really very attractive the way you did it, you know. And I don't know. You're asking me now the same question that you asked previously, and um, can we perhaps the way I answered it previously with stories about Rider Haggard and Mark Twain and you know, Enid Blyton and Gandhi, they were the people who influenced the way I thought in the early days. And of course, we mustn't forget somebody like James Hadley Chase with all these stories about American gangsters, you know. Yeah, so uh, those were my influences.
Okay, okay. Um, and thank you for the very kind words about my work. Um, I don't know if I've told you this before, but I have been, since the youngest time in my life, I have been a person that was always interested in human beings. When I was 8 years old, I was given a tape recorder. My
Oh,
father had
lovely.
had a tape recorder. And
Yes.
I, with my little portable tape recorder, I went around and did interviews as an 8 year old. So I've been
Lovely.
interviewing people for a long time. I like people.
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
My next question that I will trouble you with today is uh, when do you remember starting to write for your own amusement, for your own edification, uh, writing for fun,
Okay, you know, the writing was part of schooling. So I was now writing for what the teacher said I must write about.
right?
And I got a pleasant surprise because the teachers liked what I wrote and they would get me to read it out to the class. And so that made me realize that I could write, you know. And then there was so much to write about. And one of my regrets is that I didn't keep a diary from a young age because what was the problem was that I didn't have a proper place to store it. And I was worried that other people would read my, you know, my juvenile reminiscences or memories, and it wouldn't be private anymore. And so I actually missed out on that. And even when I went to medical school, my friends would say, you know what, you need to write about what we're seeing around us. You know, people like Steve Biko, Aubrey McQuarrie, and others who were a guy called Salmon and another guy called let's see, Pops Mudley. They were really outstanding people. And if I had done pen portraits of them then, it would have been wonderful. But writing for my own amusement didn't really happen. I was writing because I was seeing so much happening across South Africa, and I felt the need to, in a sense, diarize it, you know, put it down. And then I would write letters to the editor of the newspapers because I found so much that was wrong and irrational, quite frankly. And I found government behaving irrationally and doing things that were provoking people instead of bringing them together. So, you know, that was the kind of life we led. I didn't really write for my own amusement.
Okay, let me ask you this. Uh, Many people, I'm afraid, don't have the historical perspective, the knowledge of the evolution that has taken place in South Africa. They may know in passing that it was colonized by Europeans, that strict racial laws were enacted, and brutal punishment was meted out to anyone who questioned the established order. But you are in such a unique vantage point, not only, if you will, not being a member of either the white or the black tribe. You're from Indian heritage, which both simplifies and complicates. Could you talk just a little bit about, for people who don't have a good historic perspective, what was that evolution from the 50s, where things were, if you'll excuse the expression, black and white, uh, and the unique place of Indian emigres in the South African experience? Could you just talk about that for a little bit? And I realize it's a difficult topic. Say what you want to say. Don't feel
Yeah,
pressed.
yeah. Well, I grew up in a rural area, so in a sense, we knew Africans quite well, and we spoke to them in Zulu because we interacted with them from infancy.
Yeah.
So we spoke Zulu to them, and they spoke Zulu to us. So that made it easier. We got to know and understand them. And then when I went to the schooling was segregated. So primary school, high school, the government law was it had to be Indians only in primary and high school, and our teachers were all Indian. But when we got to medical school, for the first time, we had lecturers who were of European origin, you know, and that was very interesting for us to see how they thought, their level of intelligence, their knowledge about so many things, that not just science and, calculus and physics and chemistry and biology, but
Let me interrupt for just
yeah,
a second. Okay, you spoke Zulu to your neighbors.
yes.
What was your home language? Was it Zulu? Was
English.
it
It was
English?
English.
Okay.
English. We spoke very little Tamil, as I said in my first interview. I hope you keep that first interview
Oh,
because
I
I
still
just,
have it. Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. These are
it
precious
must,
documents.
please, yeah, it must stay on YouTube. And in fact, I must get the link from you and send it to my friends, because
Will do.
I realized that my children, especially, are going to treasure this, and they need to know. And there's a lot there that they don't know about, so
Sure.
it's going to be absolutely precious. And I thank you
Yeah.
for that. Anyway, the language we spoke at home was English, and we basically lost our mother tongue because, as I said in my first interview, my mother didn't really speak to us, and that was the convention at that time.
Hmm.
The mothers, on the whole, didn't speak Tamil to their children. The grannies did, the grandfathers did, but unfortunately, something happened, in terms of education. But I
Sure.
must tell you about this.
Please.
My parents were steeped in Indian culture. Okay, so that sort of culture emphasizes respect, especially for older people, and it emphasizes education and dignity and correct behavior. So, and somehow Euro American education is slightly different. And we find that there's less respect for older people in the European culture and the American culture, and in a sense, less dignity about how young people behave. By not getting a Western education to a high level, my parents actually retained their Indian culture. It wasn't obliterated by the free West. So nowadays, I find that the young people, young Indian, African, European people, they don't behave with even a modicum of the respect and acknowledgement of their antecedents the way we used to. And maybe in a sense we were overawed by the by our parents. Maybe we respected too much, if that's possible. But nowadays it's gone to the other extreme. And one of the things about my parents was that they didn't smoke and they didn't drink. And at that time, these addictive drugs like cocaine and mandrax and all that were not available. So we never experimented with that. We grew up in I would consider a Puritan kind of home, but I've never taken a puff from a cigarette, and that I attribute to my parents. And liquor, I only started really taking after my home fell apart. But till then, hardly took any liquor. So, and even now, I'm far from some of my patients. I'm not an alcoholic or anything like that. I enjoy red wine and that sort of thing, but I don't overdo it. And that all goes back to this strength of character of my parents.
Absolutely. I completely understand. I uh,
Yeah.
I learned early on that alcohol is a profound addictive poison. And while it may
Yes.
have social sanction and governmental approval, it is very debilitating. And I realized that I saw enough people who had the addiction problem that I wanted to make sure that I steer very clear of it. So if I have 2 glasses of wine a month, that's that, that's a high liquor content.
Right. Right. Right.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. Now, when the let's say the what's a good way to put it? When the social situation began to be confronted, when protests erupted, when the apartheid became initially challenged. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was late 50s, early 60s. So you were a young person during all this turmoil. Was the turmoil far removed from your somewhat rural setting, or was it really uh, pretty much part of everyone's life?
Okay. First of all, I must just mention, and this is the doctor in me coming out.
Please.
There's a constituent in red wine.
Okay.
I think it's called resveratrol. And this actually is cardioprotective. So it's good for your arteries and it clears up. It improves blood flow through your coronaries.
Hmm.
And it's part of what they call a Mediterranean diet.
Mhm.
So what we found is that uh, people who take a little bit of liquor, I take half a glass of red wine when I remember, literally every night. And when I went for an angiogram, I was actually quite astounded because I don't have the healthiest lifestyle. And there I was with coronaries that were almost totally clear.
Wow.
And that I actually attribute to the red wine. The kind of food I eat, and nowadays I hardly eat any food. So that actually is very rewarding. So I must mention that. Now, as far as resistance to apartheid goes, in this rural backwater where I lived, we just saw, um, Europeans behaving badly. They behaved well as well in many ways, but they also behaved badly, and the laws were obviously unjust. But there was virtually no resistance to this kind of thing. To give you an example, when you went to the post office in Amshlali, little village of Amshlali, you were not allowed to enter through the front. So you had to enter through the side entrance, and then you had to wait while the clerks behind the counter, who at the beginning were only white, they would now serve all the whites first. And you just had to sit and wait. So what I would do is take a little book with me and read while I waited, newspaper, whatever. But you knew you had to take reading material because you were last in the queue. Same when we went to the bank. That time it was Barclays Bank. So separate queue for us. And if there were 10 people in our queue and 2 people in the white queue, and the whites would get served first. If another white suddenly popped up, the 10 people still waited, and that's how it continued. One of the things I would still mystify me, and I've written about this, but I still don't understand it. We come from a heritage where we were violated in the most horrible ways, humiliated according to the law, embarrassed, messed around, and everybody, I always tell my friends, every one of us who survived, managed to get through and managed to do what we did, should be treasured. We should be cherishing each other,
You're
you know
veterans.
yeah, we should be cherishing every single one of us, contemporaries and those younger than us, because we went through the mill, we went through the fire to get where we got, and anything we got, whether it was a home, education, family, everything was not easy. We had to battle for everything. Just traveling to work was a problem. You know,
And
so, in the train, you had to have a separate compartment for Europeans and a separate one for us, and that's how it was right across. And yet, I see so much disrespect between fellow Indians, between Africans. The Europeans, interestingly enough, are actually, on the whole, very courteous and very polite. You meet them in the queues, in the shopping centers, you meet them in the parking lots. They're actually very nice to us. They don't behave badly. The people who behave badly are usually, and you're going to laugh at this, are the Indians. The Africans are actually quite cordial and pleasant as well. But the Indians, for some reason, tend to be very. I laugh at this, but it's the truth. The Indians are very anti-Indian, you know, and
yeah,
the
yeah.
the psychology of that, why they are like that, mystifies me. If there's a waiter at a restaurant and he happens to be Indian, I get cold immediately. I get worried. But if it's an African, you don't see European waiters. But if it's an African, I feel a bit more comfortable. And once I was at a restaurant and Indian waiter was passing by, and there were Africans sitting. We shared a common table. It was an outdoor place. So this Indian guy was going past, and I asked him for something, and then he went off. And then a few minutes later, an African lady waitress came by and asked her the same thing. And the African guy who was sitting on the same table asked me, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, the Indian's going to ignore us," and he did. So our food actually was brought by the African. And years ago I read something about the ugly American. You know, I tell you, you can't beat the ugly Indian.
Well, to draw a comparison in my experience,
Yeah,
uh, the Eastern European heritage that I have, these are people who emigrated late 1800s, early 1900s. So when I was a child in the 50s and early 60s, I was around a lot of labor class, factory type people, railroad type people, working
yeah,
people. No one that I knew except for one distant relative had had any exposure to college, and it amazed me since so many people that I knew, so many families that I knew, all worked either in the factories or worked in the related industries or worked in the railroad or on the rivers. And there was such cultural and ethnic animosity. The Italians versus the Irish versus the English versus the Eastern Europeans versus the Russians versus the African Americans. And I used to ask, I said, you're all working in the same jobs. You all have the same terrible burdens of lack of education, lack of opportunity. These people should be pulling together rather than, displaying this. This one's anti-Italian, this one's anti-Irish, this one's anti this and anti that, and it just didn't make any sense to me. So I decided that I needed to get as much education as I possibly could because
right.
this was not a lifestyle that I wanted to participate in, and I certainly
Yeah.
didn't want any children that I had to participate in.
Yeah. Now, to answer your question properly,
Sure.
what had happened was in the 1930s and 40s, there was something called the Natal Indian Congress, and then the Transvaal Indian Congress, and there was the African National Congress. So all these organizations were participating in resistance to apartheid, right, in the 1930s and 40s. And what the government did was it introduced the Group Areas Act, which meant that everybody would be segregated, right? And people who were hundreds of thousands of people who were in areas the government didn't want you to live actually were expropriated and forced to, forced out of where they were living and pushed into areas where, of the same race group. Right. In Durban, they created an area called Chatsworth. And then in the 1970s, they created an area called Phoenix, you know, and that's how they operated. So, and then they banned our leaders. Our leaders were hounded, incarcerated, forced into exile, and sent to prisons. And of course, they had control of the law, so they just manufactured laws to
Yeah.
keep us in control. And it wasn't anything about justice. It was more about simply shackling the people. And when you read the newspapers, they wouldn't mention things like, "Oh, the so-called non-whites didn't have the vote." That wouldn't even be mentioned in the mainline European-controlled newspapers. They would talk about things like Europeans only signs and how that was wrong. The newspapers, on the whole, were anti-apartheid, but the bedrock bottom of what our plight was not mentioned. So and we grew up as if that was normal, you
Right.
know. So when election time came, they voted, we didn't, and they seemed to be so much more intelligent than us. They seemed to be so much more knowledgeable than us. They went to schools where virtually all the teachers were European. In fact, all the teachers were European. So, when you get highly educated people teaching children, it's obviously different when you've got your segregated school and you have had teachers with limited exposure, no matter their education, now
Right.
teaching you. And I find that even up to today, I tend to use the vocabulary that was used in my peer group, in my teens, and the language that was used by our teachers. And now, when I, interact with more people, or later when I interact, I suddenly find myself exposed to words that I might know the word, but my community didn't use it you know and so anyway, to with all our leaders incarcerated and our organizations banned, African National Congress was banned. So what happened was, we grew up in an abnormal environment, but we didn't even know it was abnormal. It seemed to be the natural order of things, and the Europeans were very fond of telling us, well, this is the law, so you must obey it. And then they would say things like, oh, what's happening in South Africa happens all over the world. It's not just here. So they were very good at putting forward arguments defending apartheid. And so we just got used to that kind of lifestyle. And then in the 19, so it was like generations of our leaders who were smashed and forced into exile, like Oliver Tambo, Dennis Brutus, and others, simply, couldn't survive within South Africa. They were shot, incarcerated, banned. They couldn't be quoted. Their photographs were not allowed in our newspapers. So, and same with Nelson Mandela. Photograph not allowed in the newspaper. So I didn't even know how he looked until very, very much later. So in the 1970s, the students started mobilizing against apartheid. These are the African, Indian, and colored students. And they, again, now our leaders were picked up and that sort of thing. But such was the injustice that the you couldn't sort of stop it completely. Trade unions were not allowed, but finally in the 1970s, trade unions were allowed. And then it gradually grew from that sort of thing. And how our leaders, our internal leaders, leaders living inside South Africa survived is actually a bit of a miracle, because virtually all of them would be incarcerated. Some of them, like Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, was kept in solitary confinement for hundreds of days. And can you imagine, let's say you're a person who's kept in solitary confinement for one day. The only people you can speak to are the prison warders, and you put into a tiny cell and you kept there day after day. You know, that's what Winnie went through. And so many of our leaders went through that sort of thing. And somehow they survived, you know. But I can see, you know, once apartheid went and I started seeing how the police were behaving, I realized that the culture that they came from, these were apartheid police who are now, you know, supposed to be loyal to a democratic South Africa. But some of the things they did made me wonder about my leaders, you know, Mandela and others, and how did they survive? Because the police virtually had total control over you and your children and your family, your wife and sisters and everybody else. So all of them came in for flak. It wasn't just the leader. You know,
Yeah.
and when I see, when I saw in the 1990s how the police were behaving, it made me realize, you know, that it's really a miracle, you know. And one of the aspects of this miracle was I think the Chase Manhattan Bank refused to continue funding apartheid, to
Wow.
loan money to apartheid, right? That was in the 1985, 86, when finally the Americans said, look, we're not going to be supporting a system which is unethical. But you see, the apartheid government said they were a bastion of their version of democracy in the southern part of Africa, and they were anti-communist. So that made them attractive to the
Right.
Americans, you know.
Right.
But when the Berlin Wall fell down and the USSR basically fell apart, disintegrated into its the separate nations, and communism was totally discredited. I think it made it easier for the Americans to engage with our leaders and you know, work towards our liberation as well.
What an incredibly volatile time to be growing up in. Now,
Yeah.
you were able to get yourself a university education, a medical education, and I know part of it took place in South Africa. I think part of it you said was in Britain, right?
No, no. It
No?
was only in South Africa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, you're obviously clearly an intelligent, literate man who's gone through this fire and kept your humanity, kept your love of people and your love and hope for humanity. Um, I I I want to ask how you feel that going through that uh, has it. I would think it would enhance your compassion when you meet with people who've gone through their own troubles or your fellow South Africans. It must bring you such a perspective, such compassion.
Yeah, I think every doctor has that feeling for people, you know. But to get back to apartheid, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this. In 1976, the students rose up in revolt in Soweto. These were the high school students. And the reason they went up, you know, in revolt was the apartheid government, in their madness, made it a law that the African students had to learn certain subjects in Afrikaans. Okay, so through the medium of Afrikaans.
Ah,
So you know, the African students obviously wanted to learn English besides their mother tongue, and you know, to learn something in Afrikaans was something for them that was diabolical. They hated the Afrikaans people, they hated the Afrikaans language. Afrikaans was the face of apartheid, you know, and that was what sparked the revolution, you know. And the African people were highly politicized by the behavior of the apartheid government. And I always said the laws that the apartheid people enforced were the biggest recruiters of the African National Congress, you know. So,
I agree with you completely. And
yeah.
I've made the same argument for the arch radical conservatives here. They do better organizing for the progressives than anybody else.
Yes, yes. But the compassion and that sort of thing is what I find is that unfortunately, such is the outlook of a lot of South Africans. especially the melanin blessed ones, is that when they find that you are being kind to them, um, they might actually take advantage of you, over you, you know, and you can go in for a lot of abuse. And my friends have actually accused me of being too nice to people and then getting into trouble because of that, you know, because they try to hoodwink you, they mislead you, they because they feel that even if you catch them out, you're not going to be too hard on them, you know. So it's a tough thing to try to maintain that balance. And then the other side of it, you know, with my literary background and my knowledge of history, is I cannot understand why there's so much of frank hostility to our leaders. You know, I'm talking about all the leaders of the liberation movements, you know, whether it's in Nkrumah or um, Cabral or Gandhi or Nehru, any of these leaders. Why do they spend so much time hating those leaders? You know, I said you love to fight with dead people because they can't fight back. You know, and if you don't like what they did, fine. I mean, there are a lot of leaders. For instance, I've had quite a few hot discussions with people who call Alexander great. And I said, look, the textbooks call him great, but do you really think a mass murderer is great? They glorify Julius Caesar and Napoleon, but they were responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths of people, you know? They just didn't have any empathy for the suffering of the people they served, were supposed to serve, you know? So Napoleon is glorified or honored for his the laws that he promulgated within France and even across his empire. But at the end of the day, his wars, and I think some of them were totally unnecessary wars of aggression, not what any sane person would do.
I like to think that with the end of Eurocentric, America-centric politics for the planet, that there's going to be a reassessment of what we call history. That history is not so much about generals, it's not so much about battles, it's not so much about wars, but it's about human development, human compassion, the progress that we've made from people dying of starvation and in childbirth, that we've built a better society, a more nurturing, a more humane society. That's my hope.
Yeah, yeah.
All the evidence to the contrary aside.
Yeah, yeah. You know what you said is just so important because what I find is virtually everything we study has its roots in either Britain or America, right? So whether it's social science or it's philosophy or psychology or whatever, everything has a basis, a foundation, and it's a sad thing for me to say, but I find a lot of the academics won't question that foundation. For instance, they keep criticizing capitalism, but they won't criticize imperialism, you know? Or if they won't mention imperialism. Maybe they are critical of imperialism, but they're on a ticket when it comes to capitalism, you know, as being terrible. It is terrible, but it's a capitalism that grew from imperialism. And I think we should understand that most empires are not good for humanity, you know,
Yeah.
and we should be highly critical of all the empires, going back to Roman and Greek times, you know. But it's not like that at the moment. So to get back to my point about the roots of our education, with psychology, I did psychology as part of my medical degree. So you do first psychology, clinical psychology, and psychiatry. But nowhere is it mentioned that racism is a cause of depression. All right. So we had a talk at a bookshop, a launch of a new book on the causes of suicide by a professor from the medical school. So he spoke about 20 different causes of suicide. So I raised my little hand. I think I was one of about two or three people of color there. So I raised my little hand and I said, what do you think about racism as a cause of depression? anxiety, and suicide. And he was flummoxed. And then
Oh, gee.
immediately the chair of that conference said, Dr. Paydayachee, he knew me. We'll discuss that later. Of course, it wasn't discussed,
No,
you
of
know.
course not.
So in our medical group, it's called the Durban Independent Practitioners Association. I was asked to head the journal club. That's a weekly update club where we, get the latest advances in medicine, pharmaceuticals, and that kind of thing. So we get professors, specialists, and people like that to share their knowledge with the doctors about the latest advances. And they were excellent. But we had the psychiatrist, a very senior psychiatrist, come in. And, the big thing that all psychiatrists are involved in is the treatment of depression. So he gave his big talk, and of course, he never mentioned racism. So I had bought a book called The Psychology of Racism before it got banned, just before it got banned during apartheid. Okay. And I was fascinated by this academic tome written by an American who, according to my friends, had to flee the country. It was published in South Africa, but of course, the government was after him and he fled. So the book itself was fascinating. So I asked this psychiatrist, have you studied the psychology of racism as part of your education to be a psychiatrist? And he said no. And after that, I was quite surprised at this. In a country where racism was legal, and you don't study the psychology of racism, what it does to people. And that's because the foundation of the study of psychology and psychiatry is not in our country, you know? So somehow the academics haven't, like, in a sense, got out of their little cages, and challenged the teaching of psychiatry. So for many years, I used to ask, psychologists and psychiatrists whenever I met them, and then they would just say, no, we don't study it. So when they treat people with whatever malady, they wouldn't take into account what being of a certain color, culture, and civilization would do to you. How would it relate to you as a person who is experiencing stress, anxiety, depression? And how is that impacted upon by the laws of the country, the mores of the country, the culture of the country? Like nowadays, the new Uber mention are the Africans. So everybody's got to help the Africans to get employment and that sort of thing, places at university and whatever. So the racism, in a sense, is being fostered in our country, as is xenophobia. And if people don't have the education to understand why people are xenophobic and why they are becoming xenophobic, it just continues and gets worse. So and obviously this is not taught in school about the roots of
No, of course
racism
not.
and xenophobia, and that's criminal in my view. We've got to get the teachers to be non-racial, and we've got to get the young people to be non-racial. And one of the things that a lot of academics love saying is South Africa is a non-racial country. So last year I was at a literary conference, and there were these three very great academics, and one of them said that. And then another person on the panel spoke about the security police. So in the Q&A, sometimes I'm ignored when I ask questions, but this time the MC, the chair of the conference,
Right.
acknowledged my hand, and then I said, "How can you seriously talk about non-racism in a country where race is the critical factor for why people get jobs, places at university, how they get promotion? Everything turns around your race." And while I agree that we need to use race as a criteria, the level of advantage has to be taken into account. You can't just use race. And it was really, it was quite something, because the academic who said that South Africa is non-racial, he grimaced, and the other two people on the panel immediately agreed with me, you know. And then I said this thing about security police. I said during apartheid they were called security police. The security police named themselves the security police. So here we are continuing their nomenclature for themselves. Do you think they were anything about security about them? You know, they were secret police, they were apartheid police, but what kind of security were they all about? You know, they were about our insecurity, they were about our stress, our suffering. They weren't about caring for the country and caring for the people. And but it was quite something because in the audience was a man called Sunny Singh, and he'd spent 10 years in Robben Island. And he'd obviously been tortured and suffered terribly at the hands of this apartheid police. And so he told me, he said, Deena, I still call them security police. You know, I was in Robben Island. And he was quite old at the time. And I didn't really want to argue with him, you know, because he,
Right.
he was adamant about using that term. And after that, a few months after that, he passed away. But it's so sad, you know, because if we don't sort out how we think about people, don't use the proper language, like this term non-white. I mean, it's such a diabolical term, you know, and we continue using it. Why? I mean, you know, I'm very confused as to how people are prepared to attack their own self-respect and their own dignity by using terms that stem from apartheid and imperialism. We need to be positive about ourselves, but
Absolutely.
you know, it's still, can you believe it, an uphill battle, you know. So it's not easy because basically there's a mal-education of South African people, you know. It's a mal-education that comes out on the TV, it comes out on the radio, comes out in the movies. Everything militates against our intellectual liberation. And before we, you know, can do anything else, we have to be correct inside our heads. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
If you don't sort that out, you can't really do anything else. And the most important thing is that we cooperate with each other. We work with each other for the country. And one of the things the laws allow is public demonstrations on roads. Does that happen in America?
Oh yeah, yeah. We have our protests, our rallies typically occur in major intersections near roadways. They're meticulous about keeping us off the street, but we can have the sidewalk and in certain places we can use parks for rallies and protests. Yeah,
Okay, now,
absolutely.
South Africa is worse. Our protesters block all the roads.
Uh,
Okay, so you got an ambulance trying to take a sick person to hospital, and they can't get through. Doctors, nurses can't get through. Our industry, our commerce, everything grinds to a halt because there's a protest, you know, and there's thousands of our young people and other people marching through the streets, blocking everything. And you know, when you've got that sort of procession, you're going to get criminals joining the flock,
yep. Yeah.
and then they start
Crimes of
attacking
advanced
the
moment. Yeah.
yeah, then they start attacking the shops, and you know they attack innocent pedestrians and whatever, you know. And I once was treating a magistrate, you know, at my surgery, and I asked her, I said, "Why do y'all do this?" I said, "It's equivalent to putting a clot in an artery, you know, and causing an amputation of a limb. You got to keep the pathways open." You know, and I said exactly what you said now. I said we can have our demonstration in the sidewalk. We can have it, you know, in open venues. You can get the TV cameras there. You can get people to understand why there's a demonstration. But when you block the road, you're actually causing harm to South Africa, you know. And South Africa is far too precious and far too beautiful and needs far more nurturing than the kind that you're allowing to happen. And she looked at me and she said, well, you know, I agree with you, but it's never been raised with us. It's never been raised at parliamentary level. So I said, look, I'm not a lawyer. Shouldn't you lawyers be doing this? You know, Shouldn't you all be opposing the what's happening? Because you see, one of the problems we have is like you had the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, right? We have got something called AFRI Forum, which is basically an Afrikaner organization that will fight for the human rights of people being violated, usually by government. Okay? Now, what's interesting is these are Afrikaans and English lawyers, generally speaking, but they might include Jews, but generally speaking, white lawyers, right? And the Indian and the colored lawyers and the African lawyers aren't any part of this. So I've confronted quite a few of these lawyers of color and said, look, why don't you guys form something like that? Because, our people might find it easier to talk to you about the problems they're having, and theirs, they won't say anything. They just say no. But the reason why they're not fighting for us is because lawyers get paid so highly that the only people who can really afford them are the big corporations and the government. So the government will pay a person, an advocate, say 130,000 rand for a day, which is more than most South Africans earn in a year. You know, so you understand that they all want to be on the right side of government, so they get government work. Once they have a reputation as people who are fighting for South Africans, there's a big problem.
Well, listen, before we go too much further, I do want to have you read a couple of your recent poems. Okay?
Okay. All
The
right.
the one about your father was marvelous, absolutely marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you could just read three or four, that'd be lovely. Okay?
Yeah, yeah. I've got them all ready. I just need to call it up on my tablet.
Uh, Thank you
Um,
so much for sharing your insights to some of the current problems and the distance that you have yet to go. I know for many progressive, thoughtful people, we've long looked at South Africa as a model for improved race relations. That you've gone through that transition from apartheid to something else, and what has mostly noted is that it wasn't horrible. It wasn't a bloodbath.
yeah,
That's good. But
yeah,
as you have educated us, we understand much better that there's one side kind of racism has been switched to another kind of racism,
yeah.
and human beings can be such slow learners, such
Right,
terribly,
right.
terribly slow
You see,
learners.
if you're benefiting from injustice, and now the majority is made it benefiting from the injustice, it's going to continue. And one of the things I've written obviously makes the government very angry. But what I've said is that the ANC, the African National Congress, delivered us from apartheid and then delivered us into the hands of the criminals, because the justice system is at the root of a great deal that is wrong in South Africa. The police, the whole judicial system, the way the lawyers are paid, their culture is actually militating against human rights. But that's how it is. And I must qualify that by saying, at the moment, we're getting judges arrested. We're getting the Minister of Police on suspension. We've had a Minister of Justice who's been replaced. There's a whole lot of changes that are happening. The Speaker of Parliament a few years ago was actually suspended because of malfeasance. And so, for the first time, we South Africans are seeing, these very important people at the top of the food chain actually being called in front of something called the Madlanga Commission and being asked to account for their actions, which never happened before. They were always untouchable. And for instance, drugs, addictive drugs are freely available for our children. And I put it to one of my friends. I said, we should sue the government for allowing these drugs to be so freely available, because that is obviously against our constitution, and this particular person started defending the government, but there's no defense for that, and only if we do a class action against government, I think, will they start getting serious, because the people who protect the drug lords, it's well known, are the police. So, they work hand
Very
in hand
typical. Sure,
to
sure.
yeah, to destroy our economy and to destroy our young people. So what did we suffer for during apartheid? What did we, put our lives on the line for during that terrible era? And then we see uh, this absolute insult to the struggle of people like Mandela and O.R. Tambo. It just isn't correct. Okay, this poem is South Africans. South Africans, we are the simple citizens of South Africa. We don't need pomp and ceremony to make ourselves feel important. For that, we need the quality of our hearts and souls and the quality of our work. We are the simple taxpayers of South Africa. We don't need luxurious limousines, palaces, and pageantry to feel important, happy, and confident. But we do need love and the respect of our people. We are the simple workers of South Africa. We don't need suits and ties to feel dressed and valued. We just need to feel good within ourselves as to who we are and the work we do. We are the ordinary people of an extraordinary country. We don't need mansions and servants to feel superior and nice about ourselves, but we do need happy, loving, and grateful families who have respect in their eyes and love in their hearts. We are the worried people of South Africa. We don't need extravagant banquets, waste, and condescending, ostentatious, exclusionary dignitaries. We, loyal South Africans, look after our people and our country. We cook the food, we clean the halls, we service the cars, we fix everything. We protect our country. We don't need, as some do, external glitter to conceal the deceit and the dishonor within. We are the peaceful people of South Africa. We don't need free air travel and gifts in order to build our country and nurture our people. But we do need first class teachers and a first class education system and first class politicians, first class police, and an efficient, effective legal system. We are the proud patriots of South Africa who see a lack of patriotism as being tantamount to treachery. We help our country in every way that we can. We don't need statues, street names, or photographs in every government office in order to feel important. We do need parsimony and patriotism from the servants of the people. We, workers, are servants of the people, servants of South Africa. We are simple South Africans. We do need leaders who will listen more and do more. Leaders who are empathetic. Do not need dishonorable leaders who talk down to us and look down on us and think that they are better than us. We don't want leaders who want to be served but do not serve South Africa. We do not need curt officials who think that they are socialist, Ubermenschen, who treat us like Untermensch. We do not need leaders who steal and lie and treat us like fools. We do need South Africans who place South Africa first in their hearts and souls. For this we hope. We For this we pray. Into this state of love and honor, may our country rise like the blossoming of an African protea, caring, kind, honorable, respectful, and loving, more than we can hope for, more than we can dream of.
Wow. That's beautiful, brother. That is really beautiful. What a patriotic call that is. I think any country anywhere would hear that and say, Amen. That is wonderful. Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be interviewed by a person who has empathy. Thank you so much. Okay, the next poem is called Surfeit, Surfeit. How much do they need? How much must they steal? How many people must go without? How many people must experience pain, humiliation, and suffering so that they can have too much?
Question for all mankind.
Yes, yes. Okay, this is dedicated to my daughter. I'm just so glad that she's not in South Africa because I'd be worrying about her all the time
I can
because
imagine. I can
because of her
imagine.
father, her father who says things that should not be said. So, Seshni, a poem of love and gratitude written by her father. God must be wonderful if you could have come from him. You crawled onto my chest, Seshni. Your little 3-year-old fingers brushed aside the newspaper that I was trying to read. Your smiling, cherubic face, full of innocent affection, peered happily at me. You held my head in your little hands. Your lips covered my face with kisses, and everything about you radiated a timeless, all encompassing love. A love daughters reserve especially for their fathers. In your eyes and in your thoughts, I see glimpses of my father's wisdom. In your voice, I hear traces of my mother's confidence. In your caring and compassion, I see my father's love. In your behavior, I see the humanity of my father's heart. In your charm and charismatic light, I see the woman that I had loved who birthed you. In your writing and in your sense of justice, in your perseverance, your ability to perceive, your energy, your passion, and your intelligence, I see shards of my own essence. Thank you, darling daughter. Your creation was one of the most incandescent illuminations of my existence. I will always love you, even when you are far away, even when your eyes are turned towards another morning and I have become a memory. It is exhilarating for me to know that I'm part of the melanin in your skin, the hemoglobin in your blood, the mist in your vision, the insight in your mind, the tears in your eyes, the throb of your heart, the laughter in your spirit. You came to us from God, and when I return to God, I pray that I might leave an aroma of exquisite memories with you, my first begotten child, now a promising, beautiful young lady on the threshold of a wonderful life. I wrote that for her 18th birthday.
How lovely. I would like to share one of my poems that
Yes,
is likewise a tribute to my children.
lovely.
It's called Each Morning's Cups Blessed. After I'm granted a return today, I pour water from the sacred stream into the pot where coffee is brewed. I take the brown bean, the sweet, the bitter, the spicy, so like the moment of life, precious, darkly rich with flavor, brewing them with the heat of life. And each day, one by one, I drink one day from my holy oak cup and think of my darling summer. The next morning from my Jan Hus cup and think of my darling meadow. Each wonderful gifting cup of life and love, small containers of the incredible rich brew of life's bracing flavor. Each morning, my ritual brings me just a kiss away from these lovely girls I've had a small part in bringing to the flavors of this richly brewed life. And cycling from one cup one morning to the other cup the next, I drink from love and love. My morning coffee, another small kiss from the rich brewed life to these small gifting cups of my darling daughters. And each morning, as my lips kiss these cups, drinking the rich, deep flavors, I bless these girls, these women who brought such rich flavor to my little life. I love you both. I thank you both. And with each morning's coffee cup, I kiss your rich life, thanking the sun, the sea, the sky, the river of life for allowing me to love you and share these small draughts of the flavors of life and life. I drink my daughters and drink life's rich brew to them every morning, to you and you, whether near or seeming far, just a draught and a lip's kiss away. With love, your honored father.
Wow.